Genesis 10 is often called the Table of Nations, and it records the genealogies of Noah's sons Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This chapter helps us understand how the nations of the world were formed after the flood, showing the spread of humanity across the earth. Though it might seem like just a list of names and nations, Genesis 10 contains valuable lessons about God's plan for humanity, the diversity of nations, and the importance of family legacies. 1. The formation of nations. Genesis 10:1 introduces the chapter, stating, "This is the account of Shem, Ham and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood." The chapter goes on to describe the descendants of each of Noah's sons and the nations that emerged from their lineage. Each son's descendants form distinct groups of people that spread across different regions. Japheth's descendants are mentioned first. In Genesis 10:5, it says, "From these the maritime peoples spread out into their territories by their clans within their nations, each with its own language." These descendants primarily settled in regions around the Mediterranean and parts of Europe. Ham's descendants are mentioned next, including well-known figures like Nimrod, who was described as a mighty warrior on earth. Genesis 10:8. Ham's descendants populated regions such as Africa and the Near East. Finally, Shem's descendants are mentioned last, and they are particularly significant because from Shem's line came the Israelites, the nation through which God's covenant would unfold. In Genesis 10:31, it says, "These are the sons of Shem, by their clans and languages, and their territories and nations." 2. God's sovereign plan for humanity. An important life lesson from Genesis 10 is that God had a sovereign plan for the nations of the world. The division of nations, languages, and territories didn't happen by accident. God is a God of order, and even though humanity was dispersed across the earth, God remained in control of the process. In Genesis 10:32, it says, "These are the clans of Noah's sons, according to their lines of descent, within their nations." From these the nations spread out over the earth after the flood. This teaches us that the diversity of nations, cultures, and peoples is part of God's design. Despite our differences, we all share a common origin and purpose in God's eyes. His sovereignty over the nations reminds us that no matter where we come from, God's purpose for us isn't changing. 3. Legacy and the importance of family lines. Another lesson from Genesis 10 is the significance of family legacies. Noah's sons each became the fathers of nations, and their descendants carried on their heritage. What we do today affects future generations, and the choices we make leave a legacy for our children and their descendants. For example, Nimrod, a descendant of Ham, is noted in Genesis 10:9 as a mighty hunter before the Lord. While Nimrod became renowned for his strength and power, his legacy also led to the establishment of cities like Babel, which would later become the site of human rebellion against God in Genesis 11. This teaches us the value of legacy and the impact of our choices. Whether for good or bad, what we pass on to future generations matters. Our actions and decisions today can shape the lives of those who come after us. 4. Unity and diversity in God's creation. Genesis 10 also shows that though humanity is divided into nations, clans, and languages, we all come from one family. After the flood, the entire human race descended from Noah and his sons, which emphasizes that all humanity is connected. This truth calls us to unity, even in our diversity. This theme of unity and diversity is something we see throughout the Bible. In the New Testament, Paul writes in Acts 17-26, "From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands." This echoes the lessons from Genesis 10. God created the nations, appointed their places, and has a plan for each of them. The life lesson here is that while we may come from different nations, cultures, and backgrounds, we are all created by the same God. We are called to honor each other's differences while remembering that we are all part of God's greater plan for humanity. 5. Obedience and God's purpose. Finally, Genesis 10 sets the stage for the events of the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. While Genesis 10 outlines the spread of nations across the earth, it reveals God's purpose for humanity to fill the earth and fulfill the command he gave to Noah in Genesis 9:1, "Be fruitful and increase, say in number and fill the earth." This mandate was given to Noah and his descendants, and Genesis 10 shows how it began to unfold. The life lesson here is about obedience to God's commands. As we see the nations spreading out according to God's purpose, We are reminded that following God's will leads to the fulfillment of His plans. When we obey Him, we align ourselves with His divine purpose for our lives, just as Noah's descendants did. Life lessons from Genesis chapter 10-1. God's sovereign plan. Even in the formation of nations, God's plan is at work. We see His divine purpose in creating diverse peoples and cultures, all under His control. Unity and diversity. Although nations differ in language, culture, and geography, humanity shares a common origin and connection. This calls us to unity in God's greater plan. 3. Legacy matters. The choices we make today shape the future of our families and descendants. We are called to live lives that honor God and leave a positive legacy for those who come after us. 4. Obedience leads to fulfillment. When we follow God's commands, like Noah's descendants did in spreading across the earth, we help bring God's purposes to fulfillment in our lives. Genesis 10, though often overlooked as a genealogy, is rich in life lessons about God's plan for humanity, the importance of family legacies, and the unity we share despite our diversity. This chapter serves as a reminder that God is in control, and He has a purpose for every nation and people on earth.